discovered a bear cub stuck in a laundromat dryer. What Baby did next was life-saving. The rain tapped against the windows like tiny fingers trying to get inside, creating a rhythm that mixed with the steady hum of washing machines in the nearly empty laundromat. Lily Morgan shifted her 8-month-old daughter to her other hip, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that strange, too bright glow that made midnight feel like some other time entirely. Neither day nor night, but something in between. Her baby had been fussy all evening, refusing to sleep, crying in that particular way that meant nothing was really wrong, but everything felt wrong to her tiny world. The laundromat was their last resort, a trick Lily had learned from another mother at the park, who swore that the rhythmic sounds of the machines could lull even the most stubborn baby to sleep. She had driven here in desperation at 11:30, hoping the combination of car ride and washing machine symphony might finally bring peace to both of them. The place was almost empty, just one other person in the far corner, an elderly man reading a newspaper under the harsh lights. His presence was comforting somehow, making the space feel less lonely, even though they hadn't exchanged a single word. Lily had loaded their clothes into the washer 20 minutes ago, and now she walked slowly between the rows of machines, bouncing her daughter gently, humming a lullaby her own mother used to sing. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers, then to occasional hiccups, and now she was making those soft cooing sounds that meant sleep was finally approaching. But then something changed. The baby's eyes, which had been drooping closed, suddenly opened wide, focusing on something across the room. Her tiny hand lifted, one chubby finger pointing insistently toward the back row of dryers. At first, Lily ignored it, continuing her gentle swaying motion, but her daughter became more insistent, making small, urgent sounds that weren't quite cries, but definitely meant something. The pointing continued, more emphatic now, and Lily found herself walking toward the dryers despite her exhaustion. There was nothing special about them that she could see, just a row of industrial machines, most with their doors hanging open, dark and empty inside. But her baby kept pointing at one particular dryer, the second from the end, its door closed tight. Strange, Lily thought, because she was certain all the dryers had been empty and open when they arrived. The baby's sounds grew louder, not distressed exactly, but determined, like she was trying to tell her mother something important in the only way she knew how. Lily approached the dryer slowly, feeling oddly nervous, though she couldn't say why. The machine wasn't running, its display dark, but as she got closer she heard something. It was soft, so soft she might have imagined it, but her baby heard it too, because she reached out her little arms toward the dryer door. The sound came again, a tiny scratching like fingernails on metal, followed by what might have been a whimper. Lily's first thought was that someone's pet had somehow gotten trapped inside, maybe a cat that had wandered in when no one was looking. She reached for the door handle, hesitating for just a moment before pulling it open. What she saw inside made her step back in surprise, her arms tightening protectively around her daughter. Curled in the back of the dryer drum was not a cat, but something much larger and infinitely more unexpected. It was a bear cub, small enough to fit in the space but clearly uncomfortable, its dark fur matted and damp, its eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights like 2 amber coins. The cub couldn't have been more than a few months old, about the size of a medium dog, and it was trembling. Not aggressive trembling, not the kind that comes before an attack, but the trembling of something young and scared and completely lost. Lily's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. How did a bear cub end up in a laundromat dryer in the middle of town? Where was its mother? Was it dangerous? Should she call someone? But before she could act on any of these thoughts, her baby did something that stopped everything else. The little girl reached out with both arms, making soft, happy sounds. The same sounds she made when she saw their neighbor's golden retriever. The cub lifted its head slightly, looking at the baby with those amber eyes, and something passed between them, some kind of understanding that existed beyond words or species. The cub made a small sound, not quite a growl, more like a sigh, and shifted slightly in the drum. That's when Lily noticed the collar around its neck, worn leather that looked handmade, with something carved into it that she couldn't quite make out in the harsh lighting. The elderly man from the corner had noticed the commotion and was walking over, his newspaper folded under his arm. Lily expected him to panic when he saw the cub, to tell her to get back, to call animal control immediately. But instead, he stopped a few feet away and studied the scene with calm, knowing eyes. His name was Jacob Bennett, though Lily didn't know that yet, and he had lived in this town for 73 years, long enough to know that sometimes the forest sent messages in strange ways. He looked at the cub, then at the baby still reaching out with innocent joy, then at Lily's confused and worried face. "Been a long time since I've seen one of them this far into town," Jacob said quietly, his voice rough but gentle, like river stones rubbing together. He moved closer, slowly, making no sudden movements. The cub watched him but didn't seem afraid. "That collar means something. See the markings? That's old writing, forest writing some folks call it. This little one isn't just lost, it was sent." Lily wanted to ask what he meant, but her baby chose that moment to make a new sound, a kind of musical babbling that Lily had never heard before. The cub responded with a soft huffing noise, almost like it was trying to communicate back. The two youngest beings in the room were having a conversation that the adults could witness but not understand. Jacob reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out his phone, but instead of calling anyone, he turned on the flashlight function and aimed it at the collar. The carvings became clearer in the direct light, symbols that looked almost like letters but not quite, arranged in a pattern that seemed to tell a story. "My grandfather used to talk about this," Jacob said, his voice taking on a storytelling quality that made even this strange situation feel somehow safe. "Said there was an agreement, made long before the town was built, between the people who lived here and the creatures of the forest. When one was in trouble, real trouble, they could seek help from the other. Haven't heard of it happening in my lifetime, but my grandfather swore he saw it once when he was young. A deer came to his door in the middle of a blizzard, led him to where a neighbor had fallen and broken his leg in the woods." The cub shifted again, and Lily could see now that one of its paws was held at an odd angle, not quite touching the bottom of the drum. Injured, but not severely, just enough to make it difficult to walk. Certainly too difficult for such a young creature to make it back to wherever home was. Her baby made another sound, softer this time, almost like a lullaby, and incredibly, the cub's eyes began to close. The fear was leaving its small body, replaced by something that looked almost like trust. "What do we do?" Lily asked, surprised to find that her voice was steady. She should have been panicking, should have been backing away, but something about the way her baby and the cub looked at each other made everything feel different. Like this was exactly where they were all supposed to be at this exact moment. Jacob looked at her thoughtfully, then at the baby who was now humming softly, a sound that seemed to calm the cub even more. "First, we need to check that paw," he said, moving closer still. "Then we need to figure out why it came here specifically. These creatures don't just wander into town and climb into dryers. Something brought it here, to this place, at this time. when you and your little one were here." He paused, looking at the baby with those knowing eyes. Children see things differently than we do. They don't have all the fear and rules we've built up. Your daughter saw a friend in need. The cub saw someone who might help. Simple as that, complicated as that. Lily found herself nodding, though part of her mind was still trying to process the impossibility of the situation. She watched as Jacob reached slowly toward the cub, speaking in low, soothing tones. The cub didn't pull away, seemed to understand that these humans meant no harm. When Jacob gently touched the injured paw, the cub winced but didn't lash out. There was a small cut on the pad, nothing serious but probably painful to walk on. Jacob pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket, clean and white, and carefully wrapped it around the paw. The cub watched him work with those intelligent amber eyes, occasionally glancing at the baby, who continued her soft humming. "There's something else," Jacob said after he finished with the makeshift bandage. He was studying the collar more closely now, running his fingers over the carved symbols. "This pattern here, it's not just decoration, it's like a map, or maybe directions. See how it spirals? That's the old way of showing a path through the forest. And this symbol here, that's the sign for the moon pool." "Moon pool?" Lily asked, shifting her daughter, who was starting to get heavy in her arms. The baby didn't want to be moved, though, reaching out again toward the cub with determination. Lily gave up and sat down on the bench nearby, close enough that her daughter could still see the cub, but far enough that she felt safe. "It's a place deep in the forest," Jacob explained, his eyes getting that faraway look that comes with remembering old stories. Natural spring that reflects the moon so perfectly on clear nights that old folks used to say it was a doorway between worlds. Not between different places, but between different ways of being. Animals and humans could understand each other there, or so the stories go. Haven't been there myself in probably 40 years, but I remember the way. The cub had curled up again in the dryer, but differently now, more relaxed, like a regular sleeping animal rather than a terrified one. Its breathing had steadied, and incredibly, it seemed to be actually falling asleep to the sound of the baby's humming. Lily felt like she was in a dream, one of those dreams where impossible things happen, but they all make perfect sense while you're in them. She looked at her daughter, who had finally stopped reaching for the cub, and was now just watching it with those wide, innocent eyes that seemed to understand something profound that adults had forgotten how to see. "Why did it come here, though?" Lily asked. "Why not just stay in the forest? Even with an injured paw, surely it would be safer there than here." Jacob was quiet for a moment, still studying the collar, his fingers tracing the symbols like he was reading Braille. Then he looked up, and his expression was different, more serious but also somehow more wonderful. "Because," he said slowly, "I don't think it's just injured. Look at these marks here, at the end of the pattern. That's the symbol for mother, but it's broken, incomplete. This cub isn't just lost, it's orphaned, and somehow, some way, it knew to come here, to find another mother." He looked at Lily meaningfully, and she felt something shift in her chest, a combination of sadness and something else, something that felt like responsibility but lighter, more like purpose. The baby made a new sound then, a little giggle that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, and the cub's ear twitched in response. Even in sleep, they were connected somehow, these two young creatures from different worlds. Lily found herself thinking about her own mother, who had passed away just before the baby was born, how she had wished so desperately that her daughter could have known her grandmother. The world was full of broken connections, missed chances, lost relationships. But sometimes, maybe, new connections formed in the spaces left behind. Unexpected and strange, but no less real for their strangeness. "There's more to this," Jacob said, standing up slowly, his knees creaking. "The collar, the symbols, the timing of it all. This feels like the beginning of something, not the end. That cub came here for a reason, and your little one recognized it for what it was. Question is, what do we do now?" Lily looked at the sleeping cub, at her daughter who was finally starting to look sleepy herself, at this strange old man who seemed to know things that nobody should know anymore. The rational part of her brain said she should call animal control. Let professionals handle this. Go home and forget this ever happened. But the rational part of her brain had been pretty quiet since she opened that dryer door. And something else was speaking now, something older and wiser and less concerned with what made sense. "We help," she heard herself say. "Whatever that means, however we're supposed to do it, we help." Jacob smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his weathered face into something almost young. He nodded, like she had passed some kind of test she didn't know she was taking. "Good," he said simply, "because I have a feeling this is bigger than just one lost cub. The forest doesn't send messages like this unless something important is happening. And your little one there, she's part of it somehow. Don't ask me how I know, I just do. Same way my grandfather knew things, same way his grandfather knew. Some knowledge doesn't come from books or schools. It comes from paying attention to the world when it's trying to tell you something." The laundromat had taken on a different quality now, the harsh fluorescent light seeming softer, the humming of the machines more like music than noise. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows in complex rhythms that seemed almost like language. Lily's baby had finally dozed off, her little head resting against her mother's shoulder. But even in sleep, one small hand was stretched out toward the dryer where the cub slept. Two babies, separated by species but connected by something neither of them could name, both finding peace in this unlikely place. Jacob walked over to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked parking lot, then beyond it to where the town lights gave way to the darkness of the forest. "Tomorrow night is the full moon," he said, almost to himself. "If we're going to the moon pool, that's when it has to be. The path will be clearest then, and if there are answers to be found, that's where they'll be." "We're taking the cub to the moon pool?" Lily asked, though even as she said it, she knew it was right. Something about this whole situation had moved beyond normal decision-making into something more like inevitability. Jacob turned back to her and nodded. "Not just taking it there," he said. "Following it there. That collar isn't just marked with the path to the moon pool. It's marked with a specific time, a specific purpose. This cub was sent to find help, yes, but not just for itself. There's something happening in the forest, something that needs human help, or at least human witness. And your daughter, she's the bridge. Don't ask me to explain it better than that because I can't. But I know it's true the same way I know the rain will stop before dawn and the sun will rise in the east." Lily wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand what she was apparently agreeing to, but exhaustion was finally catching up with her. Her daughter was a warm weight against her chest, breathing deeply in that way that meant she would sleep for hours now. The cub was also deep in sleep, its injured paw twitching occasionally as it dreamed whatever dreams bear cubs have. The whole situation should have been terrifying, should have sent her running from the laundromat and never coming back. Instead, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before, like recognizing a song she'd never heard. "I should go," she said softly, not wanting to wake either sleeping baby. "But the cub will be safe here," Jacob assured her. "I've been coming to this laundromat for longer than you've been alive. I know the owner, know the rhythms of this place. The cub will sleep until morning, and I'll stay here, keep watch. Come back tomorrow evening, an hour before sunset. Bring your little one. We'll go to the moon pool together, see what the forest wants us to see." Lily stood carefully, adjusting her sleeping daughter. She walked to the dryer one more time, looking at the sleeping cub. In rest, it looked even younger, more vulnerable. Its fur was drying now, fluffing up slightly, and she could see that it was actually a beautiful, deep brown color, almost black in some lights. The wrapped paw was tucked under its body, and its breathing was deep and even. She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched its fur. It was softer than she expected, warm and alive under her fingers. The cub didn't wake, but it made a small sound, almost like a purr, and shifted slightly toward her touch. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking or for what. The cub, for trusting them, Jacob for knowing what to do, her daughter for seeing what needed to be seen, or maybe something larger, some force that had brought them all together in this fluorescent-lit laundromat on a rainy night when the boundaries between worlds seemed thinner than usual. She gathered her things quietly, the laundry forgotten in the machine. It didn't seem important anymore, not compared to what was happening here. As she walked to the door, Jacob called out softly, "Your daughter has a gift. Don't let the world tell her otherwise." Some children are born with the ability to see past the walls we build between ourselves and the rest of life. It's a precious thing, that sight. Guard it well. Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She pushed open the door and stepped out into the rain, which had indeed begun to lighten just as Jacob had predicted. Her car was only a few steps away, but she stood for a moment, letting the rain fall on her face, feeling the strangeness and wonder of what had just happened. Her daughter stirred slightly but didn't wake, safe and warm against her chest. Somewhere behind them, in a dryer that should never have held such a creature, a bear cub slept and dreamed, waiting for tomorrow's moon. The drive home was quiet, except for the swish of windshield wipers and the soft breathing of her daughter. Lily's mind kept replaying the evening's events, trying to make them fit into some kind of logical framework and failing completely. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she'd given up trying to understand and had moved into simply accepting. Some things didn't need to be understood to be true. Some connections didn't need explanation to be real. Her daughter had seen a creature in need and had responded with pure love and recognition. Everything else was just details. Inside the house, she put her daughter to bed, watching her for a moment in the soft glow of the nightlight. The baby's face was peaceful, more peaceful than it had been in weeks. One little hand was curled into a fist, and the other was open, palm up, as if waiting to receive something or maybe offering something. Lily thought about the way that hand had reached out to the cub. No fear, no hesitation, just recognition of another young being in the world. She wondered if all babies were born with that ability and most of them lost it, or if her daughter was special somehow, chosen for this strange encounter. She went to her own room but didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the rain taper off and finally stop, just as Jacob had said it would. The clouds began to break apart, and stars appeared between them, bright and distant and eternal. Somewhere out there, beyond the lights of town, the forest was dark and deep and full of mysteries. Tomorrow night, she would walk into that forest with her baby and an old man and an injured bear cub, following symbols she couldn't read toward a place she'd never heard of until tonight. It should have been the stuff of nightmares, or at least anxiety. Instead, it felt like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Lily finally felt sleep pulling at her. She lay down, still fully clothed, and closed her eyes. Her last thought before drifting off was of the cub's amber eyes, so much like her daughter's eyes in their innocence and trust. 2 babies, she thought again. Both so far from where they should be, but exactly where they needed to be. The thought followed her down into dreams where bears could speak and babies could understand them, where the moon was reflected perfectly in still water, where the boundaries between possible and impossible were as thin as morning mist. When she woke hours later to her daughter's happy babbling from the next room, the whole thing might have seemed like a dream except for 2 things. First, there was dirt on her fingers from touching the cub's fur, real dirt that smelled of pine and rain and something wild. Second, when she picked up her daughter, the baby immediately made that same musical babbling sound she had made to the cub, as if practicing for their next conversation. Lily held her close, breathing in her baby scent, and whispered, "Tonight, little one. Tonight we go back." The day passed in a strange suspension, normal activities feeling both more and less real than usual. Lily fed her daughter, played with her, went through all the usual routines, but part of her mind was always elsewhere, thinking about the cub, about Jacob, about the moon pool he had described. She found herself looking up information about bears, about their behavior and habitats, but nothing she read explained how a cub with a carved leather collar could end up in a laundromat dryer. She also searched for information about moon pools, but all she found were geological descriptions of underwater caves and tourist destinations. Nothing about doorways between worlds or places where animals and humans could understand each other. By afternoon, she had given up researching and was simply waiting. Her daughter seemed to sense the anticipation, was fussier than usual, not upset exactly, but restless, like she too was waiting for something. They went for a walk around the neighborhood, and Lily found herself looking at the familiar streets differently, wondering how many other mysteries were hidden in plain sight, how many other impossible things were happening behind closed doors or in the spaces between what people noticed. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Lily packed a bag with supplies she thought might be useful, though she wasn't really sure what one brought to a mystical forest encounter. Water, a flashlight, a first aid kit, snacks for the baby, a blanket. She dressed her daughter warmly and put on her own hiking boots, unused since before the pregnancy. Looking at herself in the mirror, she almost laughed. She looked like she was going on a normal evening hike with her baby, not embarking on some otherworldly adventure with a bear cub and an old man who knew impossible things. The drive to the laundromat felt both longer and shorter than usual. The sun was low in the sky, painting everything gold and orange, making even the ordinary buildings look magical. When she pulled into the parking lot, she saw Jacob's old truck already there, and her heart began to beat faster. This was really happening. She was really going to do this, whatever this was. Inside, she found Jacob sitting on the same bench where she had sat the night before, the bear cub curled up beside him, awake now, but calm. The cub's injured paw was rewrapped with a proper bandage, and it looked better, stronger. When the cub saw Lily and the baby, it made that same soft huffing sound, and incredibly, Lily's daughter responded with her musical babbling. The 2 young ones looked at each other with what could only be described as joy, pure and simple and completely unconscious of how impossible their friendship was. "Ready?" Jacob asked, standing slowly. He had a backpack on, worn and patched, the kind that had seen many miles of trail. The cub stood too, favoring its injured paw but able to walk. It went straight to Lily and her daughter, sniffing curiously at the baby's feet, which kicked excitedly in response. The baby laughed, that perfect baby laugh that sounds like water over stones, and the cub made a sound that was almost like laughter too. "As ready as I can be for something I don't understand," Lily said honestly. Jacob smiled that transformative smile again and headed for the door. The cub followed him immediately, looking back to make sure Lily and the baby were coming too. Outside, the evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a slight breeze that carried the scent of pine from the forest. Jacob led them not to his truck but past it, toward a trailhead that Lily had never noticed before, half hidden behind a cluster of bushes. "This is the old way," Jacob explained as they began to walk. "Before the town expanded, before the roads were paved, this was how people moved between the settlement and the forest. It's been forgotten by most, but the animals still know it. The cub knew it. That's how it got to the laundromat." The trail was narrow but clear, winding between trees that grew larger and older the farther they walked. The sounds of town faded quickly, replaced by bird songs and the rustle of leaves. The cub walked ahead of them, moving slowly but purposefully, like it knew exactly where they were going. Every few minutes it would stop and look back, making sure they were still following, and each time Lily's daughter would make her babbling sound, and the cub would respond with its huffing noise before continuing on. The light was fading but not gone, that magical time between day and night when the world seems to hold its breath. Fireflies began to appear, dancing between the trees like tiny stars. Lily's daughter watched them with wonder, reaching out her hands as if she could catch them. One firefly landed on her outstretched finger, pulsing its cool light, and the baby went completely still, mesmerized. The cub saw this and came back, sitting down to watch the firefly too, and for a moment all of them, human and animal, young and old, stood perfectly still in the gathering dusk, watching this tiny light pulse its ancient rhythm. "Not much farther now," Jacob said softly, not wanting to break the spell. The firefly lifted off the baby's finger and danced away, and they continued walking. The trail began to slope downward, and Lily could hear water, the sound of a stream or small river. The trees grew even larger here, their trunks so wide that all three of them holding hands couldn't have circled them. These were the old trees, the ones that had been here before humans gave names to things, before boundaries were drawn on maps. Then, quite suddenly, they emerged into a clearing, and Lily's breath caught in her throat. The moon pool was exactly as Jacob had described it, but also nothing like she had imagined. It was perfectly circular, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by smooth stones that looked deliberately placed, though by whom or when was impossible to say. The water was so still it looked like glass, and in it the full moon was reflected so perfectly that there seemed to be two moons, one in the sky and one in the water, each equally real. But that wasn't the most amazing thing. The most amazing thing was that they weren't alone. Around the pool, half hidden in the shadows of the trees, were animals. Deer, several of them standing perfectly still. A family of raccoons, their masked faces turned toward the newcomers. An owl on a low branch, its enormous eyes unblinking. And there, on the far side of the pool, barely visible in the moonlight, was a full-grown bear. Not moving, not threatening, just watching. Lily's first instinct was to protect her daughter, to back away, but the baby showed no fear. Instead, she made a new sound, a kind of singing that Lily had never heard from her before. It wasn't words, wasn't even close to words, but it had meaning somehow, was clearly communication. The cub responded immediately, walking to the edge of the pool and making its own sounds, different from the baby's, but part of the same conversation. And then, incredibly, The other animals began to join in, each in their own way. The deer made soft snorting sounds. The raccoons chittered. The owl hooted low and musical. Even the adult bear, so still and silent until now, made a deep rumbling sound that Lily felt as much as heard. "This is it," Jacob whispered beside her. "This is what the old stories talked about. The place where all life remembers it's connected, where the artificial walls come down. Your daughter, she's conducting somehow, bringing them all together." And it did look like conducting. The baby was moving her little arms now, not randomly, but with purpose, and the sounds of the animals seemed to follow her movements, rising and falling, creating something that was almost like music but more fundamental than that. It was the sound of life recognizing itself, of consciousness acknowledging consciousness across the boundaries of species. Lily found tears on her cheeks, though she couldn't have said exactly why she was crying. It was beautiful and sad and ancient and impossible, and it was happening right in front of her. The cub walked into the pool, the water only coming up to its belly, and stood in the center where the moon's reflection was brightest. It looked up at the real moon, then down at the reflected moon, then at the baby in Lily's arms. It made a sound that was different from before, questioning almost, and the baby responded by reaching out toward the water. Lily understood somehow what was being asked and walked to the edge of the pool. She knelt down, still holding her daughter, and let the baby's hand touch the water right where the moon was reflected. The moment the baby's fingers broke the surface of the water, everything changed. The sounds stopped, all of them, even the ever-present noise of insects and wind in leaves. The silence was complete, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something, potential maybe, or presence. The adult bear on the far side of the pool stood up on its hind legs, and Lily saw that it too wore a collar, leather like the cub's but older, more worn. The bear looked directly at her, and in its eyes she saw something that shouldn't have been there. Recognition, understanding, maybe even gratitude. Then the bear dropped back to all fours and walked slowly around the pool toward them. Lily's heart was pounding, but she didn't move, couldn't move. The bear approached the cub, sniffed it carefully, then did something that made Jacob gasp beside her. It bowed, actually bowed, lowering its massive head almost to the ground. The cub made a small sound and pressed against the adult bear's side, and Lily understood. This wasn't the cub's mother. This was something else, maybe a guardian or protector, but not a parent. The cub was truly orphaned, just as Jacob had guessed. The adult bear lifted its head and looked at Lily again, then at her daughter, who was still trailing her fingers in the moonlit water, creating ripples that caught and scattered the light in impossible ways. The bear made a series of sounds, complex and varied, and though Lily couldn't understand them as words, she understood them as meaning. The bear was telling a story, explaining something, asking for something. "The mother was killed," Jacob said quietly, and Lily realized he was understanding the same way she was, not through language, but through something deeper. Killed by something that shouldn't have been in the forest. The cub was sent to find help, but not just any help. It was sent to find someone who could bridge the worlds, someone who could speak for the forest to the human world. Your daughter, she has that ability. She was born with it. The forest recognized it, sent the cub to find her. The baby lifted her hand from the water and reached toward the adult bear. The massive creature moved closer, slowly, carefully, until the baby's wet fingers touched its nose. The bear closed its eyes, and when it opened them again, they were different somehow. Clearer, more present. It made another series of sounds, and this time Lily understood more clearly. There was something in the forest that didn't belong, something that was hurting the balance, killing not just individual animals but something more essential. The bears couldn't fix it alone. They needed human help, but not just any humans. They needed humans who could see them as more than animals, who could understand that the forest was not just trees and creatures but a living system, ancient and conscious in its own way. "What is it?" Lily asked, not sure if she was asking Jacob or the bear or the universe itself. "What's hurting the forest?" The bear turned and walked back around the pool to where it had been standing. It pawed at the ground, and Lily saw that there was something there, half buried in the leaves. Jacob walked over, the cub following him, and carefully uncovered the object. When he held it up in the moonlight, Lily saw it was a piece of equipment, electronic, with wires and sensors. "Monitoring device," Jacob said, examining it. "But not the normal kind used by wildlife services. This is something else, more invasive. It's not just recording data, it's—" He paused, looking closer. "It's emitting something. A frequency, maybe. Something that disrupts navigation, communication between animals." The adult bear made an affirmative sound, then pointed with its massive paw toward the forest. "More of them," the gesture clearly said. "Many more." Hidden throughout the forest, disturbing the natural order, making it impossible for animals to find food, find mates, find their way home. The cub's mother had discovered several of them, had been trying to disable them when she was killed by... The bear's sounds became agitated here, and Lily couldn't quite understand what had killed the mother bear, only that it wasn't natural, wasn't something that should exist in the forest. Her daughter had been quiet through all of this, watching and listening with those wide eyes that seemed to take in everything. Now she made a new sound, decisive somehow, like she had made up her mind about something. She pointed at the cub, then at herself, then made a gesture that somehow encompassed all of them, the humans and animals gathered around the moon pool. "Together," the gesture said. "We do this together." The adult bear understood immediately, making a sound that was almost like agreement. The other animals around the pool stirred, coming closer, no longer hiding in the shadows. The deer stepped delicately to the water's edge, the raccoons scampered down from their perch. Even the owl flew to a lower branch where it could see everyone clearly. They were all looking at the baby now, this tiny human who somehow spoke their language, or perhaps spoke the language that existed before all other languages, the one that life itself speaks. Jacob was studying the device more closely, turning it over in his hands. "This is sophisticated," he said. "Military grade maybe, or close to it. Someone put these here deliberately, knowing what they would do. This isn't random vandalism or careless development. This is targeted." The adult bear made another sound, and somehow Lily understood that there was more to show them, more to understand. It began walking away from the pool, back into the forest, but in a different direction from where they had come. The cub followed immediately, and after a moment's hesitation, so did the humans. The other animals melted back into the forest, but Lily had the feeling they weren't going far, were perhaps moving parallel to them through the trees, an escort of sorts. They walked for maybe 10 minutes, the bear leading them surely through the darkness. The moon was high enough now that silver light filtered through the canopy, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the forest floor. Lily's daughter was quiet but alert, her little head turning this way and that, taking in everything. Then the bear stopped, and Lily saw why. They were at the edge of a small clearing, and in the center was something that made her stomach turn. It was the remains of a camp, but not a normal camping site. There was equipment everywhere, electronic devices like the one Jacob held, but larger, more complex. There were cages, too, empty now, but clearly recently used. the smell of fear and captivity still lingering. And there, at the far edge of the clearing, was a mound of fresh earth that could only be one thing: a grave. The cub walked to it immediately, making soft, mournful sounds, and Lily understood. This was where its mother was buried, probably by whoever had been using this camp, though why they would bury a bear they had killed was unclear. Jacob was examining the equipment, his face grim. "This is a research station," he said. "Illegal, by the looks of it. Someone was studying the animals, but not in any sanctioned way. These devices, they're designed to confuse and disorient, to drive animals into specific areas where they could be more easily captured or observed." He picked up a notebook from one of the tables, flipping through it. They were looking for something specific. Listen to this. Subject shows unusual intelligence, possible communication with others of its species beyond normal vocalizations. Collar appears to be handmade, suggests human interaction in past. Must locate source. The adult bear made an angry sound, and Lily understood. Someone had discovered the old connection between the forest and the town, the agreement Jacob's grandfather had spoken of. They were trying to study it, to capture it, to turn it into data and experiments. The mother bear had tried to stop them, had been killed for it, but not before sending her cub for help, trusting in the old ways, the old connections. "We have to stop this," Lily said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "We have to find all these devices and remove them, and we have to find out who's doing this." Her daughter made an agreeing sound, reaching out toward the cub who had returned from its mother's grave. The two young ones touched, the baby's hand on the cub's head, and something passed between them, some promise or understanding. Jacob was still reading the notebook, his expression growing more troubled. "They'll be back," he said. "According to this, they clear out during the full moon because the animals are more active, harder to predict. But they'll be back tomorrow night, maybe sooner if they have cameras set up and saw us coming here." The adult bear made a series of urgent sounds, and Lily understood that time was indeed a factor. The devices were causing more damage every day, disrupting migration patterns, separating families, making it impossible for the forest to function as it should. And there was something else, something the bear was trying to communicate about the full moon, about tonight specifically. This was a special time, a time when things were possible that normally weren't. If they were going to act, it had to be now. "How many devices?" Lily asked, though she wasn't sure who she was asking. The bear pawed at the ground, making marks, 10, maybe 12, scattered throughout this part of the forest. Too many for them to find and disable on their own. Especially in the dark, especially with a baby and an injured cub. But then the bear made another sound, and the forest around them came alive with movement. The deer reappeared, and the raccoons and the owl, but also others. A fox slinking out of the underbrush, a family of rabbits, even a porcupine waddling into view. They had all been following, waiting, and now they were offering to help. Jacob laughed, a sound of pure amazement. "They'll show us where the devices are," he said. "Each of them knows where at least one is, has been avoiding those areas. If we split up, followed different animals, we could find them all tonight." It was a crazy plan, impossible really. But then again, everything about this night had been impossible. Lily looked at her daughter, who was practically glowing with excitement, making her musical sounds to all the animals who seemed to understand her perfectly. She looked at the cub, injured but determined, staying close to them despite everything it had been through. She looked at Jacob, this strange old man who knew things that nobody should know anymore, who had appeared exactly when needed. And she looked at the adult bear, massive and powerful, but also somehow vulnerable, asking for help from the very species that had caused the harm in the first place. "Okay," she said, "let's do it. But we stay together, the baby and I. We follow the cub and the bear." "Jacob, can you follow one of the other animals?" Jacob nodded, already pulling things from his backpack, tools and bags for collecting the devices. He handed some to Lily, simple things she could manage while carrying the baby. "The raccoons know where 3 are," he said, somehow understanding their chittering. "I'll go with them. The deer can show you 2 more near the stream. The fox knows of one near its den. We meet back at the moon pool when we're done." And so they separated, though Lily could still sense the others moving through the forest around them. The adult bear led the way, the cub beside it, both moving slowly enough for Lily to keep up while carrying her daughter. The deer flanked them, silent and graceful, their white tails visible even in the darkness. The moon was bright enough that Lily could see where she was stepping, and her daughter's eyes were wide with wonder, taking in everything. The first device was hidden in the hollow of a tree, covered with leaves and bark to disguise it. The bear showed her where it was, and she carefully removed it, switching it off and putting it in her bag. The moment it was deactivated, the forest seemed to exhale, like it had been holding its breath. Birds that had been silent began to sing, even though it was night. Insects resumed their chorus. The deer made soft sounds of relief. The second device was near the stream, partially buried in the muddy bank. This one was harder to extract, and Lily had to put her daughter down for a moment, setting her on a soft patch of moss. The baby immediately crawled toward the cub, and the 2 of them sat together, the cub's good paw resting protectively near the baby. Watching them, Lily felt something shift in her understanding of the world. These weren't just random animals in a random forest. This was a community, a family of sorts, connected in ways that humans had forgotten, but that her daughter somehow remembered or had never forgotten in the first place. They found 3 more devices over the next hour, each one hidden differently, each one causing its own sphere of disruption. With each one they removed, the forest seemed to come more alive, more as itself. Animals appeared that Lily hadn't seen before. A skunk that kept a respectful distance, a group of bats that swooped and danced overhead. Even what might have been a bobcat, though it stayed in the shadows and Lily couldn't be sure. They were all part of this, all affected by what had been done, all grateful for what was being undone. By the time they made it back to the moon pool, Lily was exhausted, but also exhilarated. Jacob was already there, his bag full of the devices he had collected. The raccoons were with him, looking pleased with themselves, their little hands gesturing as if telling him about their adventure. Other animals began arriving too, each group that had led the humans to devices coming to the pool, as if to report their success. "That's all of them," Jacob said, counting the devices. 12 total, just like the bear indicated. The forest should start returning to normal now, though it will take time for the animals to trust their instincts again. The adult bear made a sound of gratitude, deep and resonant. It approached Lily and her daughter, who was now sleepy in her arms, and did something extraordinary. It lay down, completely prone, in a gesture of absolute trust and thanks. The cub joined it, curling up against the larger bear's side. All around the pool, the other animals were settling too, no longer afraid, no longer disrupted by the electronic interference. The moon's reflection in the pool was perfect, undisturbed, and in that reflection Lily could see all of them, human and animal, gathered together in peace. Her daughter made one more sound, soft and final, like the end of a lullaby. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep, her little hand still outstretched toward the bears. The cub was sleeping too, finally safe, finally able to rest. Even the adult bear's eyes were closing, the exhaustion of who knows how many days of vigilance finally catching up. "We should go," Jacob whispered, but Lily shook her head. Not yet. This moment, this impossible gathering, needed to be honored. They sat in silence for a long time, maybe an hour. Maybe more, just being present with these creatures who had trusted them with their crisis. The moon moved across the sky, its reflection sliding across the pool's surface. The animals dozed or watched or simply existed in the peace that had been restored. Finally, when Lily's legs were starting to cramp and her arms were aching from holding her sleeping daughter, she stood carefully. The adult bear opened one eye, watching her. She walked over to it slowly, knelt down despite her protesting muscles, and placed her free hand on its massive head. The fur was coarse but warm, and she could feel the life thrumming underneath, powerful and ancient and worthy of protection. "We'll make sure they don't come back," she promised, though she wasn't sure how she would keep that promise. The bear made a soft sound, understanding, trusting. Then Lily stood, nodded to Jacob, and they began the walk back through the forest. The cub woke enough to follow them to the edge of the clearing, making soft sounds of farewell. Her daughter stirred, waved one tiny hand, and the cub huffed in response before turning back to the adult bear. The walk back seemed shorter, or maybe Lily was just too full of the night's events to notice the distance. They emerged from the trail to find the town sleeping, normal, unaware of what had transpired in the forest. The laundromat was closed now, dark except for the security lights. Jacob's truck was still in the parking lot next to Lily's car. "What now?" Lily asked, shifting her daughter to her other arm. "Those people, whoever they are, they'll come back. They'll know their devices are gone." Jacob pulled out the notebook he had taken from the camp. "I have a friend in the sheriff's department," he said, "and another in the state wildlife service. This notebook has enough information to start an investigation. Illegal research, animal cruelty, probably trespassing on protected land. It won't be easy, but we can stop them." Lily nodded, but she was thinking about more than just stopping the immediate threat. She was thinking about the connection her daughter had shown, the ability to bridge worlds that seemed increasingly separated. "This can't be the end of it," she said. "What happened tonight, the way they communicated, the way we all understood each other, that means something." Jacob smiled, that transformative smile that made him look like he knew secrets worth knowing. "No," he agreed, "this isn't the end. This is the beginning. Your daughter has a gift, and now the forest knows it. There will be other times, other needs. The old agreement isn't dead, just dormant. Tonight we woke it up again." They said goodbye in the parking lot, Jacob promising to call her tomorrow after he had spoken to his contacts. Lily drove home in a daze, her daughter sleeping peacefully in the back seat. The normal world seemed strange now, artificial, like a stage set compared to the reality of the moon pool and the gathering of creatures. She carried her daughter inside, put her to bed still in her clothes, too tired to change her. The baby smiled in her sleep, and Lily wondered what she was dreaming, if she was back at the pool, talking to the animals in that language without words. 2 chapters of mentioned part has completed. Lily stood at her bedroom window for a long time, looking out at the darkness where the forest began. Somewhere out there, a bear cub was curled up with its new guardian, safe for the first time since losing its mother. Somewhere, deer were walking paths they had been afraid to use. Raccoons were chattering to each other without the confusion of electronic interference. Owls were hunting by instinct instead of disrupted signals. The forest was healing itself, returning to its ancient rhythms. But more than that, a connection had been renewed. Her daughter, not even a year old, had served as a bridge between worlds that had been growing apart. She had reminded both humans and animals that they were part of the same living system, the same Earth, the same story. It shouldn't take a crisis to bring them together, Lily thought. There should be a way to maintain that connection, to honor it regularly, not just when one side or the other needed help. She thought about the moon pool, that perfect circle of water that reflected another world. Maybe that was the key. Maybe there needed to be places where the boundaries were intentionally thin, where humans and animals could meet as equals, or at least as fellow travelers on the same planet. Her daughter had shown it was possible. The question was whether others would believe it, would support it, would protect it. The next morning came too soon, her daughter waking at her usual time despite the late night. But something was different. The baby was calmer, more content, as if the restlessness that had plagued her for weeks had finally been resolved. She played with her toys differently too, more gently, more thoughtfully, occasionally making those musical sounds she had used with the animals. When they went for their morning walk, every dog they passed seemed drawn to her, and she greeted each one with that same babbling language, which the dogs seemed to understand. Jacob called around noon. He had spoken to his contacts, shown them the notebook and the devices. There was going to be an investigation, quiet at first, but thorough. The equipment would be traced, the camp would be properly documented, and whoever was responsible would be held accountable. But he also had more interesting news. His friend at the Wildlife Service, an older woman named Margaret who had worked in the area for 40 years, had heard stories similar to theirs. Other places where animals had sought human help. Other children who seemed to have the gift of communication. She wanted to meet Lily and her daughter, wanted to document these occurrences not as scientific curiosities but as evidence of something that needed to be protected and preserved. Over the following weeks, things moved quickly. The investigation revealed that the illegal research had been funded by a private company interested in animal communication for military purposes. They had heard local legends about the unusual intelligence of the animals in this particular forest, and had set up their operation to study and exploit it. The camp was dismantled, the researchers were arrested, and the forest was designated as a special protection area, off limits to development or research without extensive oversight. But more importantly, at least to Lily, was what happened with the bears. The adult bear, who they learned was an older male who had lost his own family years ago, officially adopted the orphaned cub. They were seen together regularly by hikers, always at a respectful distance, the older bear teaching the younger one how to find food, how to fish, how to be a bear. The cub's paw healed completely, leaving only a slight limp that didn't seem to slow it down at all. And sometimes, on full moon nights, Jacob reported seeing them at the moon pool, just sitting by the water, as if waiting. Lily and her daughter went back to the pool once a month, always on the full moon. Sometimes Jacob came with them, sometimes Margaret from the Wildlife Service. Sometimes they went alone. The animals were always there, not the same ones every time, but always some, drawn by something they couldn't name but recognized. Her daughter grew, began to walk, began to talk in human words. But she never lost that other language, that ability to communicate across species. If anything, it grew stronger. One night, when her daughter was almost 2, they arrived at the pool to find the cub there, much bigger now, but still recognizable. It came right up to them, no fear at all, and the little girl hugged it like an old friend, which in a way it was. They sat together by the pool, the child and the young bear, and had what looked for all the world like a conversation, complete with gestures and expressions and occasional laughter, though only one of them laughed in the human way. Margaret had started a program, very quiet, very selective, identifying other children with the gift and bringing them together, not to study them but to support them, to help them understand that their ability was precious and needed to be protected. She also worked with Jacob to document the old stories, the agreements between humans and animals that had existed long before the modern world decided such things were impossible. They were building a case not for scientific journals but for a different kind of knowledge, one that acknowledged that consciousness and communication existed in forms beyond human understanding. The town began to change too in small ways. People reported seeing more animals, not as pests or problems, but as neighbors. Gardens were planted with wildlife in mind. The local school started a program where children learned about the forest, not just as an ecosystem, but as a community. The laundromat, where it all started, became something of a shrine, though nobody called it that. People would sometimes find injured animals there, always by the same dryer, as if the word had spread in the animal community that this was a safe place, a place where help could be found. Lily never found out exactly how the cub had known to go there that night, how it had known that she and her daughter would be there. Some things, Jacob said, didn't need explaining. They just needed accepting. The world was full of mysteries that didn't fit into neat categories, full of connections that couldn't be measured or studied, but were no less real for being unmeasurable. The important thing was to remain open to them, to teach the next generation to see them, to protect the spaces where they could flourish. Years later, when her daughter was old enough to understand the story fully, Lily told her everything about that night, about the scared cub in the dryer, about the moon pool and the gathering of animals, about how a baby's pure recognition of another creature in need had awakened something ancient and important. Her daughter listened with those same wide, knowing eyes she'd had as a baby, and when the story was finished, she said something that Lily would never forget. It wasn't just about saving the cub, she said, wise beyond her years. It was about remembering that we're all part of the same family. The forest knew I would understand, because I hadn't learned yet that I wasn't supposed to. Babies know things that adults forget. My job is to not forget, to keep that door open for others. And she did. She grew up to be a bridge between worlds, teaching others what the animals had taught her that night at the moon pool. That communication doesn't require words, that understanding doesn't require explanation, that connection doesn't require proof. She worked with Margaret's program, helping other gifted children understand their abilities. She worked with conservation groups, not as a scientist, but as a translator, helping humans understand what the forest needed, what the animals were saying in their own ways. The bear cub, fully grown now with cubs of its own, would still come to the moon pool on full moons. Sometimes Lily's daughter would be there, sometimes not, but the bear would always wait for a while, as if keeping an appointment with an old friend. The collar was gone now, lost somewhere in the growing years, but the connection remained, stronger than leather, older than symbols, as real as the moon's reflection in still water. The laundromat remained a place of small miracles. People would joke about it, but nervously, the way people joke about things they don't quite understand but respect nonetheless. Every once in a while, someone would find an animal there that shouldn't be there, always in need of help, always in that same dryer, and always, somehow, the right person would be there to help. Someone with just enough openness, just enough compassion, just enough ability to see past the impossible to the necessary. Jacob lived to be 93, spending his last years documenting every story he could find about the old agreements, the old connections. His notebooks, filled with careful handwriting and sketched maps, became the foundation for a new understanding of the relationship between the human and natural worlds. Not a scientific understanding, but something older and in some ways more true. He died peacefully in his sleep on a full moon night, and some said they saw him one last time at the moon pool, young again, talking to the animals in their own language. Margaret's program grew slowly but steadily, a network of children and adults who could hear what the forest was saying, who could serve as bridges when bridges were needed. They didn't advertise, didn't publish papers, didn't seek fame or recognition. They just quietly did the work of keeping the connection alive, of making sure that when the next crisis came, and everyone knew it would, there would be people ready to listen, ready to help, ready to remember that all life is connected in ways that science is only beginning to understand. The moon pool remained unchanged, a perfect circle of water that reflected more than just light. On full moon nights, if you knew where to look and when to be quiet, you could still see them gathering. The deer and the raccoons, the owls and the foxes, sometimes a bear or two, and always at least one human child who hadn't yet learned that such gatherings were impossible. They would sit together in companionable silence or incomprehensible conversation, proof that the world was stranger and more wonderful than most people dared to believe. And in a house at the edge of town, Lily would sometimes wake on those full moon nights and check on her daughter, finding her bed empty more often than not. She never worried. She knew where her daughter was, knew she was safe, knew she was doing the work she'd been born to do. She would make herself a cup of tea and sit by the window, looking out at the forest, thinking about that night in the laundromat when everything had changed. Or maybe, she would think, nothing had changed. Maybe they had just remembered something that had always been true, that we are all part of the same story, all characters in the same vast narrative, all connected by threads invisible but unbreakable. The devices were never replaced. The illegal research never resumed. The forest healed. The animals thrived, and the town prospered in quiet ways that had nothing to do with growth or development, and everything to do with understanding their place in a larger system. Children grew up knowing that the forest was not just scenery but community, that animals were not just resources but relatives, that the impossible happened every day if you knew how to look for it, and sometimes, on very quiet nights, if you stood in just the right place at just the right time. You could hear it, the sound of a baby's babbling mixed with a bear cub's huffing, a conversation that needed no translation, a connection that needed no explanation, a love that transcended species and spoke to something fundamental about what it meant to be alive on this earth. It was the sound of recognition, of remembering, of coming home to a truth that had never really been lost, just temporarily forgotten. The story spread, not through news or social media, but the old way, person to person, whispered like a secret too precious to shout. Parents would tell their children about the baby who could talk to animals, about the bear cub who knew where to find help, about the moon pool where all creatures were equal. And sometimes, just sometimes, a child would listen with that particular intensity that meant they recognized something in the story, something that called to ability they didn't yet know they had. Those children would find their way, eventually, to the moon pool or places like it. They would discover their gift, their ability to bridge worlds, to translate between species, to remember what most humans had forgotten. They would become the new keepers of the old agreements, the new bridges between the civilized and the wild. And the cycle would continue, generation after generation, a thread of connection running through time, thin but unbreakable, invisible but essential.